So welcome everybody. My name's Neil. I'm going to be your presenter for this session. What we're going to be talking about is the 764, see if I can get the numbers right, exam. This is a preparation guide, basically. And so what we're going to be really covering is, what do you need to know about the exam, for starters? We want to try and bridge that gap between practical knowledge and the exam environment, because there's always well, this is what I do in the real world, but this is what the questions that they ask me, and that doesn't make sense, and why. So I'm going to do my best to try and bridge that. The big things out of this session is that I want to give you an idea of some resources, just how to approach the exam. Kind of the mental preparation and what to expect, so that at the end of this, you have a much better idea as to how to build your own roadmap. Do I need to sit a course? Do I need to maybe just do a practice exam? How do I prep for this exam? What do I kind of concentrate on and whatnot? One of the things that these sessions are not is we're not going to cover everything that you need to know for this exam. If I could do that in an hour and 15 minutes, that would be absolutely amazing. So until we get USB ports plugged into everybody's, direct into their brain, we just can't do that. I'm going to try and give you a few nuggets, but don't take that as all I need to know is this. You need to know a lot, right? Now, luckily, a lot of the content in SQL Server, if you've been familiar with SQL Server over the years, a lot of it is really standard content. How do I back up and restore a server, for example? Things like that. So it goes back a few generations. What we really kind of want to, or I should say, what we usually see is people really need to know the what's new. If you're already really comfortable with the old stuff, maybe you're certified in the previous products, to just kind of jump into the what's new. But we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. First off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the exam, right? What to expect for the exam. And so generally the certification exams are between 40 to 60 questions. It takes between 1 to 4 hours to complete, depending on which exam. This is all just general information here. All the questions are worth 1 point, but the way that the questions are just the exam overall is evaluated. It's a 700 to pass, but that doesn't exactly mean 70%. In a very loose way, you can kind of compare it to that, right? But the math is a little bit different. There's some resources in there that Microsoft has put out to say basically we do this, right? But the idea overall is if you're close to that line, for me, certification is really about driving my own knowledge so I know the product really well. So if I'm close to that line, I'm still thinking there's 30% that I don't know, right, roughly. And so try not to just get to that line. Try and go well over it, right, for sure. One thing about, there's a little mention in here about case studies. Just as a bit of a reminder, it's when you're doing the exam, for anybody that hasn't done exams with case studies, the approach is you do a case study. Here's the case study, here's so many questions, and then once you finish that, you can't go back to it, right? But in the exam, they tell you that, right? And say, okay, you're about to finish this, are you okay? Before you click on okay, you can go back and review any of those questions. Maybe it's 6 questions or 10 questions on that case study, but then that's like a chunk of the exam put away, and maybe there's another case study, or maybe there's more multiple choice questions, whatever the question types are. This exam actually fits in the data management and analytics path. This is a little harder to see. Let's see if I can spot it. It's really where I'm standing so close. Here we are. So this is 4. And the idea of these paths is basically you go down one of these lines, right? So going left to right, pick a path, do the first exam, do the second exam. At the end of the path, you earn an MCSA in whatever path you took. Right, so if I want to go down, where are you at? The admin one, 765 perhaps after that, become a SQL 2016 database admin. And then it's one elective to complete an MCSE, right, in this case in data management and analytics. Now, one of the things that's been asked a lot this week is, well, we have to renew. What does it take to renew? The elective list, the far right of that screen, The elective list is a list where you can go maybe next year, do another elective, and it would be a renewal, right, for that certification. So it really kind of drives people to keep in touch with the product, but also learn new stuff, right? So that you can really broaden your skill set there. About this exam specifically, this was made available October, right, so almost a year ago. This really is focused on database professionals. I think you guys all know who the audience is, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's you guys. And it really does focus on installation, maintenance, basic admin tasks. And I don't want to say basic in the wrong way. It's not easy. It's we're not talking about like analytics and all that other stuff. The very last bullet down at the bottom might include adaptive technologies. If you read any of the stuff going into the exams, Microsoft does reserve the right to change the format of the exams, et cetera, whenever they want. Now, they've been structured pretty well consistently for some time, but is it a multiple choice test? You may see multiple choice questions. You may see other question styles like drag and drop and configure this interface and things like that. It really is something that Microsoft works really hard on to make the exam content to be very relevant, to really test skills rather than just memorization, right? And that's what it's really about. Okay. Now, this exam does cover 4 functional groups. I'm going to describe these. I'll try and go very quickly because it's kind of a little bit boring in some of these objectives. You can say, it covers this, it covers this, it covers this. You can read these later on. This presentation, you can grab it from the My Ignite portal later if you want to. A lot of this is actually just in the exam guide, right? But we will get to some nuggets and all that in a little bit. So looking at these 4 functional groups, configuring data access and auditing, basically permissions. We have backup restoring of databases. Apparently that's important when it comes to a database administrator, being able to do that. The manage and monitoring SQL Server instances, that's gotten a lot of focus lately, as well as high availability and disaster recovery. Now the exam guide is this link. Go and grab it. It's one of the places I tell people this is your starting point if you want to pass an exam, right? Go to this link, look at the objectives. We're going to actually break it down a little bit, so look at the sub objectives kind of in that, those different functional groups. And you want to really assess where you are on that list. For example, for data access and auditing, would you be comfortable in doing all of that? And I'm going to break it down kind of what that means, right? So you want to start here and kind of go, can I do this? Can I do this? If you've never backed up and restored a database server, looking at all the different ways to do it, you need to sit down and learn that, right? So let's look at those sections. The very first one, data access and auditing. As a part, I'll try and go fairly quickly. Again, if you're trying to look through all these bullets or even take pictures, you might want to just grab the PowerPoint deck just off of My Ignite. You can download it, you can stream it, and all that stuff. As well as this is straight from that link previously, right? So the exam guide that was there, straight off of it for this part. Now, the first part of this, configuring encryption, and I did forget something. Let me go back here. This section, right, this functional group is worth 20 to 25% of the exam. There's 4 functional groups. There's only one that's a little bit heavier than the other ones, right? They're all roughly this big. We'll see them as we go. So in this area, configuring encryption, everything about encryption, there's some new stuff in 2016. Those are always great topics to test on. So implement always encrypted. You think you're going to get a question on that? More than likely, it's new. So new, all shiny, big focus. The other ones in here, backup encryption, transparent data encryption. A lot of these just go back to previous versions of SQL, and they're all pretty good. So data access and permissions, we're looking at permissions, so users, custom roles. There's another couple in this one in 2016 that are brand new. So we get row-level security, dynamic data masking, right, as well. And again, when you're looking at the exam guide, this is really the list that you want to kind of go down the list and say, can I do that? And if you want to kind of benchmark, like I've done it once, sure. Could I teach it to somebody? Because then you really tend to know it, right? Auditing. How do I do auditing? managing audits, etc. Now on this one, and on the previous one I think as well, I want you to kind of point your attention to the last bullet, audit logs and reports from an Azure SQL database, right? One of the things about the products now, especially for SQL, we have the on-prem SQL, we have Azure SQL. Which one's on the exam? Both, right? They're both SQL. And that, quite often, if you're very familiar with like on-prem, for example, can often be a bit of a challenge to jump over and make sure you know the other one as well. So things like auditings for audit, for example, is different between those two environments. All right, so here's some nuggets. A couple little tidbits in here. Always encrypted. It's good to know the prerequisites for always encrypted, right? Because there's some specific ones in here. Visual Studio is pretty straightforward, but the other ones, .NET Framework 4.6. And if I want to have a client connect using always encrypted, they actually have to add the encryption setting enabled to the connection string, right? So it's important to realize that. Otherwise, they're not going to be using always encrypted. Now, again, just as a bit of a reminder, we're not really here to teach everything about always encrypted. Right? There's a lot. There's other resources I'll point you to for that, right? But a few little nuggets in here about it. Another thing in the slide deck too, might be a little hard to jot down in here, but again, you can download it from Ignite, the URLs. I've tried to put a bunch of URLs, and hopefully they all still work, because I think you know, the rate of change on a lot of the websites nowadays, they should be fine though. There's some great resources if you've never configured that before. Always encrypted, another piece about always encrypted is determining whether you want to use deterministic or randomized encryption for the columns. Now, there's some pros and cons to the different approaches, and one of the things about deterministic is that a value that's in the column, when it's encrypted, another row with the same value will encrypt to the exact same value. Now, that's a challenge because if the column contains something like yes, no, you can actually look at the encrypted values and you're going to see two values throughout the entire column. So, is it reversible? Well, if you know that it's probably a yes, no column, and you kind of think, I'm going to assume that this group are the yeses and this one's are, you know, these people are the no, you can kind of reverse which one it is. So the good thing about it though is that deterministic also allows for things like indexing to work, right? Because we can actually index the encrypted values, and I can say I want to find a column with this encrypted value, and I'm going to get the same thing all the time. Now, the randomized version of this doesn't do that. So if you had a column, 2 rows, and the value in the column was identical, right? So city, I'm from Canada, by the way. Say city equals Toronto. Both of those encrypted values would actually be different in the rows. Now that hides the data much better, but all of a sudden it disables things like indexing and all that, right? So a bit of a pro and con there. The other thing is when you're setting this up, of course, you do need to configure column master keys and encryption keys. And again, there's a link there to help you out with that. Oh, and one more thing, the binary 2. Deterministic does require binary 2 for the sort order for that. So again, a few little tidbits. SQL database dynamic data masking. Now, if you haven't seen the dynamic data masking, it really is to hide the data value. So similar to credit card numbers that have all the X's, everything's X'd out. But actually do it back at the database and say when this person connects, this user can't see the unencrypted values. They can read the masked values, right? So you see kind of at the bottom of the slide the way that something is padded. How do I configure this? Well, we have different ways of hiding the data, right? So whether it's something like an email, some standard templates, or go down and do a custom string. Very, very useful because most applications will traditionally have done this at the application level, which means the data is actually going from the database to the application without any masking, and then we finally mask it maybe, right, in the application. So right back from the database. Again, another new feature. Both of these always encrypted in this one, brand new features. All right, next section. Back and restore databases. There's a little bit of new stuff in here, but most of it is actually kind of standard stuff. I would point you to some of the more advanced scenarios in back and restore, right? So not just how do I back and restore a database, but how do I do like a piecemeal restore? How do I do file level backups and et cetera. So in here, backing up a very large database, if you're not sure what that entails, it's different than just taking a long time to do a full backup, right? So again, should I do a file group backup? What does that look like? Alerting for failed backups, there's a few different ways to do that. This actually jumps into things like operators. There's another section for that. So jobs, et cetera. How do I get notifications if something fails in there? We have the traditional stuff, things like transaction log backups, database recovery models. That that really hasn't changed if you're familiar with the product for a few generations. Restoring databases. Notice that the objectives here are seem to be very focused on the advanced stuff. Right, so again, piecemeal, page recovery, point-in-time recovery, file groups, and making sure that you have a good plan in there, right? So, like I said, apparently backup recovery is pretty important for databases. Go figure. All right, the last little bit on this is database integrity. So, do I even know if I need to restore my database? So basically, dbcc, checkdb command, and other things around it. And there is a disco after this presentation. So that one I didn't really give any nuggets on it because it's pretty standard stuff. So moving on. This section, monitoring, managing SQL Server, you notice that it's weighted a little heavier than the 20 to 25%, right? So 35 to 40%. And when you look at this, it has a lot more objectives, right? So we're looking at monitoring the database activity, current sessions, things like blocking, consuming tempdb, how do I analyze that? The data collector, doing utility control points. There's a lot just in that. That's the first objective in here. Monitoring queries, right? So something that's new again, the query store. Working with extended events and trace events, and there's a lot in there. This is usually one of the areas that's much more challenging for a lot of people to really get through, right? And there's still more. Now, one of the things I get asked a lot about this is like, okay, so extended events. The list of extended events is massive. What do I need to know? Is it all of it? No, because you would be doing the exam like 5 years later or so by the time you get through all of it. It's just a ton. Try and focus on what's often referred to as the 80-80 rule, right? What do 80% of the population use 80% of the time? That's a pretty good benchmark. It's a little fuzzy, but it's a pretty good benchmark. Say, okay, these are the key ones that we see in a lot of the examples and things like that. Try and focus on those. And there's a lot of guidance by Microsoft to say this is how to troubleshoot queries or performance issues and whatnot. So these are the ones that you see in the examples and how to do that, right? So those are great from a learning perspective to study from. Problematic execution plans, et cetera. Managing indexing. Right? Apparently that's another area that's fairly important with databases. And don't forget the column store indexes are in there, and they've been improved in 2016, so that's kind of a new feature. And any new features are great areas to make sure you know pretty well, right? Statistics. There's one in here that I just want to highlight. Implement statistics for large tables. What that really entails is going beyond just enabling statistics, because as soon as you get into large tables, we get potentially some issues with statistics. They're not as accurate because the table has just way more data than what statistics really allow. If you've never really dove into how statistics work, I would highly encourage it, even outside of the exam, because it's a great performance boost. By simply adding statistics that are filtered and whatnot. The reason is a core statistic will actually keep like 200 entries in what's called a histogram. And for a really large table, the 200 entries are think individual statistics for gaps in that data, but the data is so large that it's not as accurate as we would like. So we can add more statistics that cover very specific areas in the database, like maybe data that's heavily used in a large table, right? And be very granular with statistics. So, so the large table stuff, absolutely go a little further into statistics, not just how do I auto-enable them and things like that, auto-update. Server instances, the alert failures, I think this one's pretty straightforward. This really hasn't changed a whole lot in this area from previous versions, again, so I think that's pretty good. All right, so a couple nuggets in here. The first one in here is some of the database resource monitoring, and this one's focused on Azure SQL, right? So we have the amount of data that's really in these views, right? So the first one, DB resource stats. Actually, sorry, I skipped one. The master sys resource stats, based on a 5-minute analysis, like for the averages, and stored for approximately 35 days, right? So if you go and read from this, know how accurate the data is and how long it's being kept, because in Azure there's a bunch that it's not going to keep forever. The next one is a 15-second average, and those only kept for an hour, right? So take a peek at both of these. These are the common ways to start looking at some resource monitoring with respect to Azure. The other thing in Azure are things like alerts and all that, to go and configure alerts in the Azure portal, different than what we have in an on-prem SQL Server, right, for them. Again, great link at the bottom. Monitoring troubleshooting, so query tuning. With Azure, we have the query performance insight and automatic tuning, which got introduced. DMVs that are worthwhile to look at, and it's a pretty good list. There's more, and again, this isn't the definitive list, but these are definitely ones that you would probably want to know, right, for sure. Event auditing, pretty straightforward. Again, a link for that. So just a few little tips to grab. Extended events, there's a bunch. Which ones do you concentrate on? Like I said earlier, 80-80 rule is and what you see a lot of the examples being used. There's a couple tips that I give on this one, that the difference between which one you're using. You notice near the bottom, catalog views, replace server with database. Basically, they have a lot of overlap for the different events, whether you're looking at the server level or the database level. And if you're looking at catalog views, which don't start with DM, the server ones start with server, and the database ones start with database, right? Now, the DMVs do things a little bit differently. The server ones don't tend to have server in it at all. The database ones do, right? So if you just kind of keep track of which names are which, it'll help you identify, if somebody asks, so you want to monitor this at the database level, which one you're talking, you can weed out some of the other ones, right? There's, I think we're pretty good for the other one, startup state, so check that out. Monitoring pools. Monitoring pools, this is when we have an elastic pool out in Azure. How do I do that? This is a kind of an example of one of the ways you can do that. And one of the things about this example is that this will actually pull the data for 5-minute granularity, right? So when it goes over and grabs the metric, it'll actually give you the data for every 5 minutes. You can scale it all the way down to 1 minute. Now, this got changed a while back. It used to be 5-minute granularity was the lowest you could go, right? And that was bumped down to 1 minute. So pretty worthwhile change in there, and you can keep that for 30 days for free. Anything past that, we got to start pumping it out to storage, right? Which is, blob storage is going to cost money, which is why it's not free at that point. In the portal, worthwhile to note that in the portal you can configure the graph to actually show up to 5 databases at a time. Beyond that, you'll have to pull it more dynamically with PowerShell or something like that. All right, the last one, I believe, right? I think we got 3. This is the 4th, high availability and disaster recovery. So again, 20 to 25%. Apparently, high availability is the other real big area for databases. How do I configure always on and things like that? So the first one, log shipping. Yes, it still exists. There are people that still use it. I'm just going to leave that there, right? It's still there. All right, so the new stuff, though, the newer, always-on availability groups. A lot of focus by Microsoft on this, and one of the things in 2016 was a change to the licensing. So you can actually configure always-on in a standard edition. right, for SQL. So worthwhile to take note of what's changed in that, and the restrictions with it as well, right? So there's restrictions of how many nodes you can have, and always on in standard edition. It's really geared to replace mirroring finally. The rest of this, how to configure an availability group, manage it. So configuring, of course, what type of connection we're doing. Is it an asynchronous connection, a synchronous connection? Another new feature in 2016 is that we have the ability to load balance the read-only nodes, right, for that. So, how do I do that? What does it take? So all of that are worthwhile to look at. We also have failover cluster instances, right? That's still there. So how do I manage that? Shared disk, clustered share volumes. What's the configuration of that? Now in this one, looking at some of those new features, I think I mentioned a couple of them already. So I mentioned the database mirroring being replaced with the standard edition ability. Load balancing of read intent connection request. Number of replicas. That has been increased for the support automatic failover has increased from 2 to 3, right, for that. Database level health detection. So this is another new feature in 2016 where if a database were to fail within an availability group, to fail over the availability group, right, to detect that. Previously, it was really like if the server failed, then it would move the availability group over. So database level failover actually does need this DB failover on when you're creating the availability group. It has to be configured to allow for the database level failover. Something else that's new is it now supports group managed accounts and DTC support, encrypted database support. That's just knowing, if there's an encrypted database, can I do this, right? So definitely know a bunch on availability groups. A few of the considerations on the Azure side of things. Things like geo-replication. This gets a little bit challenging because if we're using geo-replication, remember that the different disks that we can assign, let's say it's to a virtual machine, for example, that's still a virtual machine running SQL, is still SQL. We have Azure SQL as well. Managing the disks in a virtual machine, we don't really need to do that for Azure SQL, but we still get geo-replication and all that. If you're doing it in a virtual machine and you separate your database files away from your log files, basically have multiple disks, remember that they replicate on different patterns, right? There's different timings for that. They're not replicated together in that, which means you potentially can get a virtual machine out of sync, for all of its files. That one file is out of sync with the other ones, which is a big consideration there. The other thing in here too for if you separate like virtual machines in Azure and they're on separate networks, we actually have to add another bit to the connection string to do the multi-subnet failover equals true, right? To say no, they're on different subnets. And another little kind of gotcha in here is the DHCP service that comes built in with Azure Virtual Networks. It's not compliant, right? It's not RFC compliant. So in order to make it behave nicely, you need to add a private address to the cluster name, right? Make sure it's there. So that the cluster is always available via that IP. So link local IP address. All right. How are we doing for time? Oh, I actually went through that a lot quicker than I thought. So we might have some time to play with some questions, which that's what I'm planning on. All right, so at this point, that was kind of the exam. Hopefully there's a few nuggets in there, but like I said earlier, we're not trying to teach the product in an hour and 15 minutes. I spend a week with people, and it's one topic in SQL. It takes a lot longer to learn it. So if you're brand new to SQL, this did not give you all the knowledge to pass that exam. All right, at this point, though, I want to talk about a few other things. All right, so I mentioned trying to build that roadmap. So what kind of preparation resources do we have here at the show? It's Thursday. There's a big party tonight, so depending on how the party goes for you and you show up tomorrow, I'm not sure how many of these resources you'll get to use tomorrow, but they are here. Also just online, etc. Then I want to kind of get everybody's head into exam mode. What does it take to actually pass? Sit down and do that. And that's, personally, I find that's one of the areas that most people have the most difficulty. You can work through the technology, but getting it into the head and keeping it and getting into exam mode is actually one of the more difficult things that most people By the way, a little background about myself. So I've been an MCT for just shy of about 20 years. I've ballpark, I think I'm just shy of about 70 exams under my belt or so. I've helped out with exam preparation, like authoring and materials and other sides, and you name it, course development. So I've been around this for some time. So when it comes to actually, I'm going to say writing exams, I'm Canadian. Taking exams, I say that properly? Yeah, I've done one or two, right? So some tips. All right, so preparation resources. I mentioned this before, one of the first places you really want to start is the exam guide. All the objectives that we went through were straight from that. Go down that list. If there's an area that you barely know, you want to sit down and learn it. If you want to learn it, there is a course. That's the middle one, the 2764. Notice that the last three numbers line up. Microsoft Learning has been pretty good to say, here's the exam, here's the course, same numbers. They actually match the same objectives, but the authors for them are different, right? So is it going to be exactly what you need to know, like everything in that book is going to be perfect? No, but it's pretty good, right? You definitely want to follow any links, like, for more information, go here and deep dive a little bit more than the book. Okay? But it's pretty good. That's a 5-day course. You can do them online, different vendors, all kinds of stuff. Now, the other thing, TechNet, resource in TechNet, the documents online. A lot of the links are going to be, if you want to configure this, like always encrypted, there's an article, right? Microsoft Docs now. There's an article out there on how to do that, right? So it's a great place, resource to be able to deep dive and all that. Here at Ignite, there are a bunch of MCT ambassadors. I'm one. There's a couple just outside the door here. There's a pile of them around. We got them in the Expo Center. We got them downstairs in the immersion zone and a few different places. I'm not wearing my badge right now, but you'll see a button on pretty much everybody that will say, hey, I'm an MCT. Now, the thing is that, not only do we know the products, we have to take the exams, write the exams, or pass the exams, however that's said in the US. And then we teach it, right? So we're constantly getting other people to do it. We're all advocates of certification, and so please come to talk to us. The prep sessions, obviously, that's here at the show because you're here. So that's what this is. Some of the benefits for exams. The exams here at the show, 50% off exams. After the show, and free practice exams. Practice exams, you go out the door, it's just to the left. The real exams are to the right. What's that? Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. This one is not there. So what do? Go to an older version, right? And because the difference between the older version and the new version is just the what's new. Now there's some things like always encrypted and always on, things like that. That are different, but things like backup and recovery, how to do a piecemeal, restore, anything like that, that's the same in the previous product. So you're going to get, 60% at least of the same stuff. So go back and use that, get yourself into the question and answer mode, and then fill in the gaps. Eventually that will be out because it is Measure Up is a vendor, and it takes them some time to develop the exams, right? So they're not done in parallel and all that. So you just got to wait for it, and when they get that out, they get it out. Some of the other deals after Ignite, there's a text code that you can get from any of the ambassadors, the ones out here, over in the expo hall, and I believe on the My Ignite you can probably dig it up as well. Basically, after the show, 40% off the real exam up to October 31st, 30% off practice exams up to October 31st, and it does require a text code to go get it. I would suggest seeing the staff over the Expo Center. They're in the Azure area in the Expo Center, and they're hidden, they're facing the wall. So you're, yeah, so if you're there, walk around where you don't expect anybody to be, and they're right there. So they're a little hard to find, but there's any of the purple shirts will help you wear that and find out where it is. The text, I need the number, but I will tell you they have it right outside, the desk right outside. Yeah, and there's a few different labels depending which one you're looking for. But they have all of them right outside the desk. Yeah, so you can grab that. Yes. Now, there is a catch with that. There's a process to, they're having trouble with the international texting. And so there's an email process as well. And for that one, I'm going to tell you, you're going to want to talk to the Microsoft Learning staff over at Certification Learning over at the Expo Center, right? They have a process to go and make sure you get that via email. Yeah, so they will have it at the show. Some other stuff in here. Let's see, we talked about that. Lots of information. Other resources here at the show. There is the hands-on lab area, which is right downstairs in the immersion zone. And one of the things about that is, there's a number of labs that are SQL focused. But if you've looked at them, they're on things like, R, USQL, very specific features in the product. Nothing that's going to get you through like the exam, for example, or like backup and restoring a SQL Server. However, they are SQL Server installs, and you do not have to follow the lab document that they gave you. So if you need to go and play with something, fire one of those up. It gives you a virtual environment, possibly more than one, and you can sit and play with the servers and do what you need to do, hopefully. It's just a matter of the configuration. You may not, if you're trying to do like 8 nodes on an always-on cluster, they don't have that many nodes, right, and whatnot. So anyway, so that's worthwhile. The other thing is the number of sessions on SQL Server. I think you guys know that. It's pretty easy to find that. So there's a lot of SQL content in here. Okay. So this part is the part that I said I think most people have the biggest struggle with. So how do you go from, I know so much about SQL, to I know enough to pass the exam? Because the first question I always get, or almost always get, is, well, I've been a SQL administrator for 10 years. How long will it take for me to get certified? I have no idea. So, how do I figure out what I don't know? And that's really what this is. So when you're preparing for the exam, I mentioned the guide. Here's some tips. Definitely schedule your study and schedule the exam. It's really easy to get behind work and whatnot, and it gets pushed out a little more, Well, then the stuff that, like for example, if you learn some material in sessions this week, 3 months from now, how much of that are you going to remember, right? So get on a schedule, an hour a day, whatever works for you. Make sure you're on a schedule. Use what you don't use. A lot of people, when they say, I've been a database administrator for whatever number of years, the first thing in my head that I'm thinking is they do fairly routine tasks. Like their organization, they're doing the same or very similar stuff day after day. There's a really good chance that they've never, ever configured something like always encrypted or whatever. There's a lot of holes in there. So make sure when you're looking at those objectives that you kind of identify, I've never done that. Go and do it. Or I've only done it once. Go and do it. Make sure you use the stuff that you've never used in the workplace, right? If you've done backup restores, like piecemeal restores, day after, well, hopefully not day after day in the workplace, but you've done them a number of times, you probably don't have to study that. Know the GUI, know the code. And this is fairly challenging now because we have multiple ways to really manage SQL. So if you're familiar with using Management Studio, great. Make sure you take a peek at all the Transact SQL. That would do the same job. And that's actually easy with Management Studio because you can configure Management Studio and then have that script out. But then we have PowerShell, right? And remember that when you're managing things like Azure SQL, PowerShell becomes a little more important because we can connect to Azure and connect to Azure SQL behind that. So definitely know a bunch in the code. Take a practice test and learn the gaps. Now I'm trying to kind of zip through so we can get some practice questions in here and take a look at how to work through them. When you're doing a practice test, the biggest mistake, and I see this a lot, is people will go through a practice test concentrating on the score. Do not do that, right? I don't care what kind of score you get on the practice test. And I get a lot of people that go into the exams and come out again, and they're like, well, I had an 800 and something on the practice test, and then I went and did the real one, and I failed. Yeah, because you were concentrating on the score. And the reason I tell people that is when you're looking at the practice test, when you get a practice question, you want to evaluate your confidence level with that topic. So when you see the question, before I even look at the answers, if I know the answer, I can explain why it's the answer, and then I actually look at the answers, I can say, yep, there's the answer that I thought it should be, and the other answers, I know exactly why they're all wrong. I don't have to study that topic at that point. I knew it before I even see the answers. Now on the flip side, I'll go way over to the other end of the spectrum. Practice question comes up. I don't have a clue what they're talking about. I pull out a pen and paper, a notepad, and jot down this topic and then try and gauge how much time it's going to take to learn that topic. I'm not going to guess. I don't care to guess, right? I need to learn it. I had no clue about it. The tough ones are the one that's somewhere in the middle. So when you open up that question, and you look at it, it's like, I think the answer is this. And let's say, just throw a number at it. Your confidence level is, let's say 70%. I think it's this. I'm not sure what that other answer is. I know what that bad answer is. I know why that one's wrong. But there's two other ones. It's A or C. I'm not quite sure. I think it's this one. And a lot of people go, check the answer, and goes, I got it right. And then moving on. Stop, rewind. Okay. What didn't you know in there? Did you know why it was? Did the wrong answers, did you know why they're wrong? And you're going to take that pen and paper and jot down this topic, like this command I've never seen before, this DMV I've never seen before. It might be 5 minutes to look it up, right? Whatever it is. Take a quick peek and go, that's more complicated than I thought. That's an hour, right? What you want to develop from the practice test is a study guide. That's it. And if you do that, run away, do the studying, come back, do another practice test. And you're going to find some more material, do the third one. I'll pretty much guarantee that you'll walk into the real exam and pass it, no problem at all. Oh, the last one, sleep. A bit of a side note, I've done so many exams that I've actually fallen asleep during one. They get really boring after so long. Luckily, I woke up and finished it. A few other things with the exam. Relax, right? We've all been trained to really avoid failing, right? Everything that you've been taught in your life has been failure is very bad because, if it was school or college, whatever, it was repeating like a year. And you came home with a test and your parents, if you had parents like mine, I didn't see the light of day for 2 weeks if I failed something miserably. And so it's just, it's bad, bad, bad. You know what happens if you fail this one? You get to schedule it again. That's it. Nobody beats you with a stick or anything like that. So just relax. And it's a really hard thing to do. Myself, I've done a lot of time. I've done a lot of exams, and still kind of going. It's like I don't want to fail. Really, it's so what, right? Go do it. Try it. When you're looking at the actual questions, look for the differences between choices. And this is really a focus thing. As you're looking at the question, go, okay, between the answers, what's different? What are they asking and what's different between them? It's just you want to get through the question, focus on that very quickly. Keep it simple. This is another common mistake. A number of times when people are going through the exams, they'll look at the question and kind of go, well, this is what they're asking, but I know in the real world, we would do it this way because we usually have this other product that's in there or, this sort of structure. Did the question say they have that structure? No, don't add it. Don't add to the question. Everything's in the question, right? So don't make it more complicated than what it is. Just keep it simple and look for those details, right? When you're looking through the question, did they say this? There's a reason pretty much for every statement in there, right? So definitely look through them. Case studies. There's always a bit of a debate, for a case study, should I, go, the way I phrase it, bottom up or top down. In other words, do I look at the case study, kind of try and memorize through the case study, and then go look at the question? I tend to go just the opposite, right? My preference, not everybody does it, but I find it's a lot faster. I go to the question. Okay. hopefully I know it well enough that I go, these are the things I'm looking for, because they're asking me, maybe how do I, configure always on, whatever. So I go, okay, based on the question, I go back to the scenario, and you can just zip through the scenario fairly quickly. Does this sentence have anything to do with the question I just read? Nope, 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 yes. Yes, yes, nope. The answer is C. Next question. And, and most of the time, that will actually go quite a bit faster, right, for that. Now, if you don't know the answer, in the exam, you can mark it for review. I'd highly encourage you to do that. Don't spend a ton of time trying to hash out an answer for that one. Move on, get the ones that you know. You're not going to know every answer for it, right? It's rare to do it. So definitely just move on. There's a little option to mark for review. Once you get through the end of that section, you can then go back and answer the ones for review, right? Definitely make sure you answer all the questions, because no answer is definitely wrong. All right. Practice questions. We're doing pretty good, eh? We have almost half an hour left. Unless I'm on Canadian time and I got that wrong. So the practice questions. There's a number of practice questions in here, and my focus on this isn't so much to look at the details of the technology. It's a little bit more on just the questions. So the first one in here, I'll let you read it. This part usually takes a little longer. So. Pretty good. Now, as a practice question, what would you say your confidence level is? You don't have to show them everything, but could you tell me what the answer is? I'm not showing you the answers for a reason. That's the confidence level I was talking about. Now, if I look at that and I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure. At that point, I don't even care what the answers are. That's an hour or something for me to go look at it, right? I want to know how to do that. And hopefully when I come back, I go, this is the answer, and when I see the actual answer, it's like, oh, those ones. There's another piece of this question that I want to point out. You'll see a statement at the end of it that is important to kind of focus on when there's more than one answer. So this one, it goes, each correct answer presents a complete solution. Choose all that apply. Pay attention to that. In this case, they're saying that one answer will complete the job, but there's another answer or more that will also complete the job, right? They're not put together. Now, there's other questions that may say, each correct answer presents a part of the solution. So it's like, here's one thing you need to configure, here's another thing you configure, and together, they do the job. In this case, the choose all that apply, these are very separate. So just kind of curious, anybody have the answer before I showed them? Yeah. Sure, shoot. Yeah, it's a really good, and just for the recording, just to reiterate the question. So the last part, the choose all that apply, is that going to change in the future? And the focus is definitely on being a little more precise with that, because choose all that apply can be a little bit difficult. And so the vast majority of questions, depending which exam we're talking about, will tend to say, choose 2 or choose 3, whatever the number is for that. So you're absolutely right for that. So B, any others? And C. There you go, right? And C. Now, if I felt I knew it pretty well, and like I said, it's really common in this one, I say, well, I definitely know it's B, and then I do the practice, like, oh, I got it wrong, and I looked at it, it's like, oh, okay. I kind of just learned it. I probably don't have to go read the TechNet page or anything for it. But yeah, definitely use this as a study guide. The next one, which of the following must you do before you enable? This one you notice it's choose 3. Now there's a reason I picked this question. How many answers are there? It's 4. They want 3. This is now, which one does not belong? There you go. Do I need to even read the rest of the answers? No. Done. Right? And it just helps you to get through the exam a lot faster. Not always. Yeah, are they always this nice? Absolutely not. No, there's some gimmies. You will find some gimmies. And there's going to be other ones that'll just throw you for a loop, right? That's the nature of testing. So let's see, this one, counters. Before you really read the question on this, take a look at the answers. What do you notice? Just quick glance, like the 2-second glance. What's the first thing that kind of jumps out to you? Yeah, like A and B are very similar, and C and D are very similar. Okay, so what's the difference between the answers? Well, and I'm just talking about the text. The first one is they're both processor, and the second one they're both SQL buffer manager. So I have to make a decision. Is it processor or buffer manager? And once I make that decision, then I can make the next decision. Let's say I say, I don't know which one, buffer manager, buffer manager or processor. What do you think? I didn't really give you a chance to read it, but I'll give you a chance to read it. So I just want you to make a decision between processor and buffer manager. Forget about processor, right? So a few people said processor. All right, now what's my decision? I have 2 answers I'm looking at now. And it really is, privilege time and user time. In this case, this is another one, choose all that apply. And so, again, more than likely you'll see choose 2 or whatnot. But when you see a lot of the answers that are really broken down like this, they're very, very similar, right? Pay attention to the differences in the answers, right? The first 2 are processor. Okay, those are processor. If I need to look at processor, now I will look at A and B a little more closely. The bottom 2, buffer manager, same idea, right? So make that decision first, and then roll down the line for those. That make sense? It seems like we're kind of trying to social engineer answers, and that's not the case. The point is, it really helps you focus on what the question is asking and where the answer is, right? You still got to make the decision, is that actually the right answer? So for this one, what's everybody think? A, B, C, D? It is choose all that applies. So A and B. Good job. All right, this one's a little bit longer. This one is similar to what we just talked about, though. It's just a little more complicated to see it. So if I were to categorize A and B and C and D, the first 2, A and B, are talking about the primary replica. The second 2 are talking about the secondary replica. And then after that, in A and B, since they're both primary, the second part of those answers are whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And same idea for C and D. At this point, I'll let you read through the question. What does everybody think? B and D? Good job. I don't know why. Hopefully you guys all have your exam scheduled for tomorrow. Yes? Not necessarily. Not necessarily for that. And it's one of the reasons why the focus, like, a lot of the focus is kind of moving away from the choose all that apply, because it's all over the map. A lot of people tend to get them wrong because they don't know. They kind of go, oh, there's only one answer. There must be at least two, and they end up picking another one and getting it wrong. And it's just those kind of mistakes. And that's not that's, you know, my opinion. It's and this is fairly shared. That's not really fair to, you know, the candidate, because it's no longer about the skills. It's more about the interpretation of the language, right? And so that's one of the reasons why this is kind of going away. So it's rare now to ever see them. You know, but depending on which exam we're talking about, this one's a newer exam, so take that as you will. But yeah, choose two, choose three. That's the more common approach for these. But yeah, choose all that apply. It could be one answer. All right, a couple more in here. Permissions. Give you a second to read that. Yeah. My question is, why do you think I put this one on here? Was that? Yeah. Sure. Some of these are just straight up memorization, right? So especially when it comes to security, when you look at like built-in roles, you just have to know which ones do which, right? And so that's always, those are always good areas to sit down and kind of study. You know, this license has, you know, these abilities. This one does not. These security roles have, these, you know, server roles have this. These database roles have these permissions already included in it. Yes or no? Because they're pretty much straight up. You know, here's a user. I want to give them these permissions. What does that take? Can I put them in this rule, or do I grant them, you know, any of these? Like in this case, what's the answer? Or B. Any others? Yeah, it should be A. So, but this really is kind of a straight up memorization thing, right? This one's kind of borderline for it, but yeah, definitely there's going to be some areas in there like that. All right, what else we got? Another one. This one I just threw in because I could. Right. D. Now, the way that I tend to look at this question, because again, it's really about focusing on the important bits. Make sure you don't, you know, ignore anything. But when you're reading that, you know, the middle, you want to perform a full backup of the database 1 p.m. without affecting the existing restore sequence. And my thought is, why did the author of that question put that phrase in there? Because it was just straight up back up the server, right? Or, you know, whatever the task was. They don't need that statement, right? It's something that's a little unusual. They put stuff in the questions to make sure it's very clear on what you are expected to do, right? So as soon as we see that, as soon as you get to something a little bit different like that, existing, you know, without affecting the existing restore sequence, hopefully everybody goes, that's a copy, right? That's what they're for. And sure enough, it's a copy. Pretty good. Yes? Oh, yeah. I'm going to answer, yeah, so the question, again, just for the recording, so the actual statement, like the type of backup is copy only. So is this how accurate is this where it just says copy database? So two things. One is the real exam tends to be much more thorough in its in its vetting before it ever gets live. And so they tend to be very accurate. A lot of the practice tests can be a little bit looser. They strive to be perfect, but it is a practice test. And so if you see something like that, definitely, you know, it's copy only, but where this is a little bit off, the best choice is still D, right? So basically a difference between practice tests versus the real tests. The real tests are very, very much, there's a very thorough process for those. Yeah, it's a good question. And I think this is the last one that I have. We'll have time for some more questions, I think. Beautiful. Give you a minute to read that. Say A. Good job. A. Now, why did I put this in here? A couple reasons. One, PowerShell. Don't forget PowerShell, right? DBAs tend to go Management Studio, Transact SQL, forget about everything else, right? No, PowerShell, even for things like availability groups and stuff like that. And so, failover cluster, I guess, in this case. But the other thing that I put in here, if you're going through a practice test and you see this question, and I go, oh, I know it's cluster, the move cluster group, but I look down that list and it's like, there's a cluster virtual machine role, move, what? That is something I put on my to-do list, right? Look up that command. I've never seen it before. I just want to know what it does, because in the practice test, A might be the right answer. In the real test, the question may actually be worded in a way that D is the right answer. So when you're going through this, if you don't know anything in if there's something in the answers that you don't recognize, that goes on your to-do list, right? A lot of people that make that mistake because they go through the practice test is like, oh, I got that one right, I got that one right. I did it 5 times and I got it. I know exactly what that command does. And then they turn around and get to the real test and the question is just worded in a way that the answer is actually cluster virtual machine role or whichever. And I go, oh, oops. And if they were to guess at that point, more than likely they would probably do I think it's cluster group. So anyway. All right. That is basically what I have. And I went through that faster than I thought, which is pretty awesome, because that means we have time for questions. Just before I really open up the floor, just a reminder, please evaluate the session. We do these to really prep everybody, do as much as possible. If I could give you all the answers, I wouldn't anyway, but just because I am who I am. But we can't teach the content. I think everybody understands that. Hopefully you got some nuggets, and I think getting your head into the game is the biggest thing. That's the biggest stumbling block that most people have going into the exam. So hopefully it was useful. Any improvements, any comments, please give us that feedback. With that, that's pretty much it, but questions. I'll open the floor for everybody. If you don't have any, see you, enjoy the show, and thanks for coming. All right, so for the questions, at this point, I'm gonna get you to use the mics, and mainly because it's being recorded for later and all that. So, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, say that again? Yes. Oh, yeah. So this is when you have the cluster. So the question being, for the multi-subnet failover equals true. It's you can, and I'd have to look at it on why. One on each subnet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yep. 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 So if I've got it, the problem with that is the delay on it. So when you add that into the connection string, the failover happens right away. It's much quicker. for it. So.
Yeah, it's for leaders, but without that, it never used to even I did the first GMS level.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But with 2016
Mm-hmm.
and when I got and I think it has.
Yeah, that's definitely improved in there. So one thing maybe to throw in there with respect to the exam, especially when you're talking like Azure SQL and stuff. Think about when the exam was authored, right? And on the page for the exam, it'll say this has been kind of refreshed as of this date, because there's a bit of a question all the time with, especially with the Azure stuff, all the cloud stuff, that well, that's moving forward. So a new feature in Azure, like let's say something dropped, we'll go to January or something, and you want to do the exam then, and something just got lit up in Azure SQL. Say, here's a new feature. Is it in the exam? From just a logistical perspective, it takes about 3 months to get stuff into the exam, right? Because of the process, like there's a lot of, I's to dot and T's to cross to make sure any changes go into it. So you're going to see a delay for that. And if something was deprecated or something like that, same idea. The other thing is Microsoft Learning has been much better on the exam page to say this has been updated as of this date, right? So you can focus on those dates, because there's definitely, if the exam says this was authored like October 2016, it was the way things were in 2016. I totally understand the challenge on that, because if you're learning it now, it's, well, how were things back then, right, for that? So the practice test, any of the other materials like books and all that definitely help. But it's a tough problem to solve, because the Azure stuff keeps moving forward, and there's something very wrong with the question. They do try and take it out as quickly as possible. So there's a process kind of there, but it's not instantaneous or anything, or there's a delay. So yeah, absolutely. What's up? Oh, that's a good question. So can you do the practice test here at Ignite from home? And the answer is no. I don't believe there's any way to do that. Because what happens is they actually have all dedicated stations over here to do that, because it's lit up for free on it. And to do it from home, there is the code for after the show. I mean, you could use it now, but it's like 30% off. It's not free, right? So, and that's the one that you just ask the ones out at the booth. They have it's 52, a number that I'll probably give to you wrong. Yeah. So practice questions, yeah. So practice questions for 764. The exam guide doesn't have anything on there. It's basically just the guide. The practice questions aren't available yet. My recommendation is go back and actually look for the exams for 2014, right? So look at, and yeah, and yeah, 462, 463, 462, I believe. When you go back to those ones now, the catch is you want to also kind of compare that with what's new, because there's some questions that will come up and say, like, for example, some of the new features and always on. This is the way you did it in 2014, but 2016 has actually changed. So make sure you get that gap in there and focus on, okay, what's everything that's new with the database engine in 2016. So some of those practice questions may actually be invalid, but a lot of them are going to be good, right? Especially like back and recover, all the stuff that hasn't changed. That's all still part of the exam, right? So hopefully that helps. And eventually the practice test will be available. So no idea. That's going to come from Measure Up specifically. So I don't. That's a good question. You might want to check in the study room. I don't think there is, but there may be. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and the challenge for all those like study materials and whatnot is really just to get the materials developed, right? Because anybody that actually authors the exam is not allowed to do any of those stuff. Like there's a bunch of, making sure everybody stays honest, right? For that. And so, yeah, it takes some time to find other people to actually go through the process to make them and all that as well. So it is what it is. Cheers. Question? Yeah, what's up?
2017,
Mm-hmm. Not, there's nothing quite on the docket that's been released. So for 2017, nothing has been officially announced from Microsoft Learning.
like 2012 and 2014.
Yeah, well, 2017 introduces some really neat things in 2017, actually, but the expectation, there will be an exam for it eventually, right? So, and keep in mind, like the product has to release, then the exams tend to come out a little bit after the product because they need to have the full release. They're not going to do the exam on betas and have to change it all. And so there's definitely a process, for them to do. So once it drops, then it has to go through and make it. So eventually the one. I'm not sure of anything beyond that though, because it's 2016. It's been live for a bit. So and the exams for 2016 came out a little bit after 2016. I didn't think about the dates overall, but this exam actually went live like October, right? So of last year. Yeah. So think of that kind of pattern generally for most exams. But yeah.
And we talked about an upgrade
To do which one? Sorry.
from the MSA.
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about upgrade paths at all. So the upgrade paths, they're getting fewer and far between, and I'd have to think about an upgrade path on this one. I don't believe there is, but don't quote me on that. So, and the reason, actually, I'll go way back here. I'll go way back. And the reason is basically this: that because upgrade paths and all that were really difficult, and so if I go way back here,
Yeah, because of
faster.
the function.
There it is. That one right there. So yeah, so on this one, one of the things is about the renewal is to do new exams. So like the right-hand side here, like if we turn around and did the 2012 track, 2012, 2014 is this very top track, right? And then I'm like, well, I want to upgrade to 2016 or 2017. You can go back and do one of the exams on the right-hand side, including the one that we just talked about. It's not quite on there. You can do like any of these other ones that are 2016 based, for example, a little more focused, and you end up upgrading your MCSE or whatever to the other one. Now, a lot of the times, a lot of the middle, so in the track that we're looking at, this one, 764 and 765, they aren't over here, right? But some of the other ones are. Let's find one that is matched. So like 775, for example, is also an elective. So what a lot of people tend to do is, do their upgrades, and it's really just like 2 exams for most of these. And then you want to do an upgrade, so you end up doing like 775 at the bottom, for example. You end up with that, and then you do 776, and you get a different MCSA, right, for it. So the whole upgrade and keeping current process has really changed fairly recently, and I think that's really the focus, to try and sort of simplify what you're getting an MCSA in for that. And so, beyond that though, there's no specific upgrade exam, right? So, right. Anytime. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Do you have a question? Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what happens with the full backup is it turns around and logs it as somebody took a full backup at this time. Oh, it won't break the log chain. The problem is, okay, so like if you did, let's say, a full backup every night at midnight or whatever, right? And all of a sudden, one day you do one at like 1 p.m. and at 2 p.m. everything goes sideways. If you turn around and look at your logs, like you had a full backup at 1 p.m. That full backup was put on a disk and sent out with FedEx or something out, but I don't have it. It's gone. Now, I can force it to go back to another backup and kind of go through a lot of it, but I'm missing a backup. The logs are going to say, you have this history, you go back to the one at 1 p.m., restore that one, and then restore the logs after it. That's the chain. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, physically it works. If you go into Management Studio and go to restore, it goes, these are the ones that we're going to back up because it looks at those logs. Otherwise, the commands get way messier to do it because you kind of say, no, 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 give me this one instead and all that. With the copy, it's a full backup, but it just doesn't log it, right? So it never happens. So if you did a full copy at 1 p.m., sent it, then you turn around and go, I need to restore my database. It goes, the last full backup we had was midnight the night before, and it doesn't see the other one at all. And it just goes, and these are logs, and just click, pretty much. And that's what they mean. You know, that's, yeah, as soon as you see something like that, they're like, why is that in the question, right? Yeah. And that's the thing, like, just focus on what they're asking. And when you look at those pieces where they go, this is part of the question. Why is it part of the question, right? Okay, that's the difference between these, right? Especially when you look at what's the difference between just full backup and a copy backup. It's like, this is the difference.